A waitress asked Keanu Reeves for a $50 0-cent tip to save her son's life, without knowing who he really was. She thought it was just a desperate moment in a quiet diner, but what happened next would shake an entire town and uncover a secret buried for decades. Why did Keanu really come to Brighton Hollow? Before we continue this incredible story, let us know where you're watching from. If you enjoy stories like this, subscribe to the channel, because tomorrow we have another inspiring story you won't want to miss. The smell of burnt toast and overbrewed coffee clung to the air like a second skin. Leah Carter wiped her damp palms on the front of her faded apron and forced a smile as she stepped up to the counter. It was just another Monday morning at Tilly's Diner, the kind of sleepy roadside spot where the booths squeaked, the ceiling fan buzzed, and the regulars knew everyone's name. But Leah felt anything but steady. Her stomach churned as she glanced at the clock. It was just past 8, oh clock, amen. She had already cleared 4 tables, refilled coffee more times than she could count, and smiled through 3 rude customers who didn't even bother to look her in the eye. But none of that mattered right now. What mattered was the small, silent weight sitting in her apron pocket. $47.20. That was all she had. And the pharmacy wouldn't release Eli's medicine until she had 50 more. Without it, his lungs would struggle again. Without it, tonight might be another frantic rush to the ER with him wheezing and clutching his chest, eyes wide with panic. Leah's breath caught as the door chimed. A man walked in, tall, lean, dressed in a weathered leather jacket and jeans that looked older than the town itself. His hair was dark, slightly disheveled, and there was something about the way he moved. Quiet, calm, like someone who didn't need to prove anything to anyone. He glanced around the room once, then chose the corner booth, the one with the ripped red vinyl seat no one ever sat in unless everything else was full. It wasn't. Leah watched him for a second longer than she meant to, then grabbed the coffee pot and a menu. "Morning," she said softly, approaching his table. "Sit wherever you'd like." He nodded and eased into the booth without a word. When she reached his table, he looked up briefly. "Coffee, please," he said. His voice was low and worn at the edges, like a song you'd played too many times. She poured the steaming liquid into his mug. "We've got apple pie this morning. My mom's old recipe just came out of the oven." The man gave a faint smile. "That sounds perfect." She turned to get it, and for a moment the world blurred. Her mind flashed to Eli's face that morning, his little hands clutching his inhaler, the way he whispered, "Mom, I can't breathe good," while tears welled in his eyes. She'd held him tightly, whispering back, "I'm going to fix this, I promise." But what could she do? She'd already sold everything of value, her wedding ring, her mother's jewelry, even her own laptop. Tilly, the diner's owner, had given her as many extra shifts as possible, but it still wasn't enough. The pie sat untouched on the counter as Leah stared at it, her hands trembling slightly. The man's voice broke her trance. "Everything all right?" he asked. She blinked quickly and forced a nod, grabbing the plate. "Yeah, just a long morning." She returned to the table, sliding the pie in front of him with a weak smile. He thanked her with a nod and began eating in silence. Leah moved through the diner like a shadow, refilling coffees, clearing plates, and pretending the pressure building in her chest wasn't going to explode. She dropped off a check at table 2, wiped a smear of ketchup from a booth cushion, smiled at old Ray when he complained about the heat like he always did. But her eyes kept drifting back to the corner booth. The man ate slowly, savoring each bite like he had nowhere else to be. He seemed thoughtful, distant, not unfriendly, just lost in something deeper than the breakfast rush. She refilled his coffee once, then again. He thanked her both times without looking up. Carla, her co-worker, gave her a nudge at the server station. "You okay?" she whispered. "You look like you haven't slept." "I haven't," Leah muttered. "Eli had another bad night." Carla's face softened. The med's still not working? They're gone. We need the stronger one now. But it costs $200. I've got almost half. Carla glanced at the man in the corner booth. And you're hoping he's generous? Leah said nothing. Her face said everything. The man finished the last bite of pie and set his fork down. Leah felt her heart drop. This was it. He was going to leave a few dollars on the table, walk out that door, and be just another passerby in a town full of broken stories. She wiped her hands, grabbed the check, and walked over. "How was everything?" she asked. "Really good," he said, glancing up. "Your mom's recipe." Leah nodded. She passed it down. "People say it's the only thing that makes this place feel like home." He reached into his pocket and pulled out a worn leather wallet. Leah's eyes dropped to the bills. He pulled out a 20. "That should cover it," he said, placing it on the table. $12.50 for the meal, $7.50 tip. She'd seen it 1,000 times, but this time, it wasn't enough. As he stood, reaching for his jacket, something inside her snapped. Her voice came out before she could stop it. "Sir?" He paused, one hand on the door handle, and turned. Leah swallowed hard. Her hands shook, her throat tightened, but she forced the words out anyway. "I know this sounds crazy, and I'm really sorry to ask, but would you maybe consider tipping 50 instead of 7? The diner froze. Old Ray looked up from his paper. Carla stopped writing down an order. Even the cook poked her head out from the kitchen. Leah's face flushed crimson. She stared at the man's back, heart pounding in her ears. "I wouldn't ask," she added quickly, "but my son's medicine is $50 more than we have. He's 8. He can't breathe without it." The man didn't move. Not at first. Then, slowly, he let go of the door handle and turned around. And instead of walking out, he walked back to the booth and sat down again. The entire diner held its breath. Leah stood frozen, still gripping the check in one hand like it might anchor her to the floor. Her heart beat so loud it drowned out the soft hum of the ceiling fan, the faint clatter of cutlery, the sizzle from the kitchen. Every eye in the room was on them now, but all Leah could see was him. He looked at her, not with judgment or pity, but with something that startled her even more. Recognition? "What's your son's name?" he asked, quietly. "Eli," she whispered, the word barely audible. His expression didn't change. He didn't smile, didn't blink, just nodded slowly, like that name meant something to him. "How old is he?" "Who just turned 8 last month," Leah said, her voice trembling. The man leaned back in the booth, folding his hands loosely on the table. "Tell me about Eli." Leah blinked. I don't understand." "You said he can't breathe without this medicine. I want to know who he is, not just what he needs. What makes him laugh? What does he love?" The words stunned her. No one ever asked about Eli like that. They asked about his symptoms, his medications, his insurance. Never about his dreams. "Hell loves bridges," Leah said before she could overthink it. "He builds them out of popsicle sticks, cardboard, whatever he can find. He wants to be an engineer. Says he's going to build the first bridge on the moon." The man's eyes flickered with something warm. "That's a big dream." Bill watches videos of suspension bridges on our old phone. He talks about tension cables and counterweights like a little scientist. But lately, he's been too tired to even sit up. Last week, he collapsed at school trying to walk up the stairs. Her voice cracked. "He's not just sick," she continued. "He's scared. And he's trying so hard to be brave. But the truth is, we're out of options. And I've never asked a customer for anything like this before. I wouldn't now if it wasn't..." She stopped. "If it wasn't life or death." Silence. No one in the diner moved. Then the man did something Leah didn't expect. He reached into his jacket and pulled out a pen. "Write down the pharmacy name," he said. "I'll take care of the medicine." Leah stared. "You don't have to." He held up a hand gently. "It's not charity. You're doing what any good mother would do, and I'm doing what I wish more people would." She scribbled the pharmacy name on a napkin and handed it to him with shaking fingers. He looked at it, folded it carefully, and tucked it into his wallet. Then he said something that made Leah forget how to breathe. "Tell Eli, the bridge to the moon just got its first supporter." Leah couldn't move. Her knees threatened to give out, and she had to grip the edge of the table just to stay upright. This stranger, this man she'd only known for 20 minutes, had just promised to buy her son's life-saving medicine without asking a single question about cost, obligation, or explanation. He hadn't flinched. He hadn't hesitated. He had just offered. And now he sat across from her again, looking at her like he hadn't just stunned the whole diner into silence. She managed to sit down slowly in the seat across from him, too stunned to think, too grateful to breathe. "Why?" she asked softly. "Why would you do that for someone you don't even know?" He didn't answer right away. Instead, he looked out the diner window, watching the sun stretch slowly over the roofs of sleepy Brighton Hollow. "Because breathing shouldn't be a luxury," he said quietly. "And because sometimes the right thing is obvious." Leah studied him. He didn't act like someone important. His jacket was scuffed. His boots were dusty. He had no phone in hand. No entourage. No air of self-importance. Just a calm presence. And a voice that sounded like it had seen more than it said. "Eli's been sick since he was little," she said after a pause, surprising herself with how easily the words came. "He was born premature. Lungs never caught up, the doctors said. He gets winded just walking across the living room." The man nodded, his eyes never leaving hers. "But he's smart," she continued. "Smarter than me. Smarter than anyone I know. He builds things. Not just toys. Actual structures. He once made a drawbridge out of spaghetti and paper clips. It held 3 books before it broke." A soft smile tugged at the man's lips. "Sounds like an engineer." "Hal says he's going to build bridges in space one day," Leah said, and for the first time that morning she laughed softly. "Says the moon will need highways when people start living there." The man chuckled under his breath. "He's not wrong." She leaned forward, her hands still trembling. "But dreams don't mean much when you can't breathe." There was a long pause between them. The kind of silence that didn't feel empty, but full. Full of understanding. Full of things not yet said. "What's his name again?" the man asked. "Eli," she said. He nodded, the faint smile returning. "Tell Eli his medicine is covered. I'll take care of it." Her breath hitched again. "I don't know what to say." "You already said it," he replied. "You asked." She shook her head slowly, blinking back tears. "I can't accept that. I mean, you don't even know us. We're just—" "You're not accepting charity," he interrupted gently. "You're accepting help. From a friend." The words caught her completely off guard. A friend. Not a stranger. Not a customer. Not some man who came into the diner for coffee and pie. A friend. She opened her mouth to argue, but nothing came out. How do you argue with someone who sees your worth before you can even explain it? How do you say no to help when you've already run out of every other option? "I don't even know your name," she said quietly. "You don't have to," he replied. "Not yet." He reached into his jacket again, this time pulling out a small notepad. With a blue pen, he jotted something down, tore off the page, and folded it once. "This is the name of the pharmacy where Eli gets his medicine, right?" She nodded slowly. "Brighton Hollow Pharmacy, Main Street. It's a few blocks from here." He handed her the note. It just said, "Covered, K.R." "I'll call them later today," he said. "They'll have what he needs." "But it's so much money," Leah said. "It's not just one refill. He needs this medicine every month." "I know," the man said simply. "How could you possibly know that?" He didn't answer that part. Instead, he leaned forward and said, "Has he ever seen the ocean?" She blinked. "What?" "The ocean," he repeated. "Has Eli ever seen it?" She shook her head. "No, he's never left the state." "Helm," Should, the man said. He deserves to know how wide the world really is. Leah tried to swallow, but her throat felt like it had closed up. You don't even know him. I know enough, he said. I know he dreams big. And I know his mother's brave enough to ask for help when she needs it. That tells me a lot. I'm not brave, she whispered. You are, he said without hesitation. Most people don't ask. They just carry the weight alone. You step forward, even with a room full of people watching. She looked down at her hands. They were clenched in her lap, like she could squeeze the panic out of her bones. I thought everyone would laugh at me. The man didn't. No, she whispered. They just stopped, like time froze. Because sometimes, he said, the world recognizes when something important is happening, and it stops to listen. Leah felt her eyes well up again, but she didn't try to stop the tears. This wasn't pity. It wasn't shame. It was relief. It was release. You didn't have to do this, she said. You could have just walked out that door. I still might, he said with a small smile. But not before making sure your son can breathe tonight. Carla brought over 2 cups of fresh coffee and set them down gently. Leah looked up at her friend with grateful eyes. Carla gave her a tiny nod, then stepped away. I don't understand you, Leah said, turning back to the man. Most people just pretend they don't hear when you're struggling, or they throw you $20 and tell you to stay strong. But you sat back down. He tilted his head, as if considering the weight of that truth. Because I've been on the other side of the table, he said. I've had moments where I was desperate for someone to stay, to listen. I know what it feels like, to wonder if anybody cares. You? Leah asked, shocked. But you seem calm, like nothing could rattle you. He chuckled, and this time the sound was warmer. Calm doesn't mean untouched. She stared at him. He was a mystery wrapped in silence. He wasn't flashy or loud. He hadn't mentioned his name, flashed a business card, or hinted at wealth. But there was something in his voice that hinted at pain, something real. Do you have kids? She asked. He paused. No, he said at last, but I think about it. Leah took a sip of her coffee. It had gone lukewarm, but she didn't care. Her hands were still shaking, but her heart was beginning to slow. I don't know how to repay you, she said. You already have, he said gently, by reminding me why kindness still matters. They sat in silence for a few seconds longer. Then, finally, he stood. Leah stood too, instinctively, like she couldn't let him leave without saying more. Are you coming back? She asked, almost afraid of the answer. He turned toward the door, then glanced back over his shoulder. Maybe, he said. Depends on how that bridge to the moon turns out. And with that, he left. The door chimed behind him, the sound soft and surreal. Leah stood there for a long time, holding the folded note he'd written. Her co-workers said nothing. The customers didn't speak. Even the cook in the back didn't call out an order. It was as if the entire diner had just witnessed something sacred, and no one quite knew what to say. Leah slowly walked to the window and watched him step into a dark car parked by the curb. She saw him glance once in the rearview mirror before pulling away. She pressed the napkin to her chest as if holding a lifeline. Then, with tears still in her eyes, she whispered to herself, "Who is he?" 3 years earlier, Leah Carter's world split in half, with a soundless crack no one else could hear. It happened on a Tuesday afternoon in spring. The doctor's office smelled like antiseptic and artificial lemon. Eli had been sick for weeks. First a cough, then wheezing, then days when he could hardly catch his breath. Leah had assumed it was allergies or a lingering cold, something ordinary, manageable. The pediatrician, a woman with kind eyes and a tired voice, sat them down and explained the scans, the tests, the blood work. Eli had a chronic respiratory condition, likely asthma, possibly more. He would need medication, regular treatment, and constant monitoring. the kind of care that cost more than they had. Leah sat frozen, one hand on Eli's tiny shoulder, the other gripping the paper-covered exam table. Her husband, Aaron, stood by the door. He didn't speak during the appointment, didn't ask a single question. His arms were folded across his chest, and his jaw was locked tight. They didn't talk much on the drive home. 2 days later, Leah came back from her grocery shift and found a note on the kitchen table. Aaron was gone. No forwarding address, no calls, just 3 lines scrawled in ink that had bled from the pressure of his handwriting. "I can't do this. I never signed up for a broken kid. Don't try to find me." Eli was asleep in his room, clutching a pillow that was too big for his tiny frame. Leah stood in the doorway for almost 20 minutes, unable to move. When she finally sat down, she cried until sunrise. The next morning, she called her mother. Gloria Carter arrived 2 days later with a suitcase, a casserole dish, and a look of fierce determination. "We're not going to fall apart," she said simply, wrapping Leah in the first real hug she'd felt since Aaron left. "We're going to survive. Do you hear me?" LaHaye nodded into her mother's shoulder. "But how?" Gloria squeezed her tighter. "One day at a time." They moved into a small duplex on the edge of Brighton Hollow. The landlord gave them a discount when he saw Eli's oxygen machine and the homemade bridges Leah had displayed on the windowsill. The place was old but clean. Gloria took the smaller room. Eli's breathing improved with the clean air and new medication. Leah enrolled in night classes at the community college, determined to get her degree in civil engineering. She worked at a gas station during the day and cleaned offices at night. Every dollar went to rent, food, and Eli's care. Hope became a quiet rhythm they lived by. But life, Leah had learned, doesn't hold still for long. 6 months after moving in, Gloria started losing things. First it was her car keys, then words mid-sentence. She put the milk in the pantry and left the stove on. At first, Leah chalked it up to stress. Her mother had taken on a lot. Then one day, Leah found Gloria crying in the laundry room, holding a shirt like she didn't know who it belonged to. "I can't remember what I was doing," Gloria whispered. "I came in here for something, but I don't know what." Leah took her hand gently. "It's okay, Mom." But it wasn't. The diagnosis came 3 weeks later. Early onset dementia. Manageable, the doctor said. With medication, routine, and patience, they could slow it down. So Leah adjusted. Again. She dropped her night classes, picked up more shifts at Tilly's Diner. She created a whiteboard schedule in the kitchen and labeled every cabinet in the house. She reminded her mom to take her pills and Eli to take his. She handled insurance calls on her 15-minute breaks and clipped coupons to stretch every meal. Her dreams of being an engineer were shelved. Not discarded, just put away. For later, if later ever came. Despite everything, she never lost her tenderness. Leah never grew bitter or cold. She smiled at customers even when her feet ached. She read to Eli before bed even when she hadn't slept. And when Gloria had moments of confusion, Leah never raised her voice. She reminded her mother who she was, patiently, again and again. People in Brighton Hollow started to notice. Martha from the flower shop would leave bouquets on their porch. Greg the postman always delivered their mail by hand just to check in. Carla brought home leftovers from the diner and slipped them into Leah's locker. They weren't a charity case. They were a family doing their best. And somehow, that made people want to help. Eli kept building. Bridges out of cereal boxes, towers from soup cans. He didn't talk much about his dad, but sometimes Leah caught him staring out the window, lips pressed together, eyes lost in places too heavy for an 8-year-old boy. One night, she sat beside him as he sketched a suspension bridge in a spiral notebook. "Do you miss him?" she asked. Eli nodded once. "But I don't need him to build stuff," he said. "I just need you." Leah kissed his forehead, holding back tears. "I'm not going anywhere, baby." "I know," Eli said simply. You're my best bridge." She didn't understand what he meant at the time, but she never forgot it. Time passed, bills stacked, Gloria's condition slowly worsened. Some days were better than others, but the weight on Leah's shoulders never got lighter. Last month, Eli's usual inhaler stopped working. He was wheezing more. He couldn't walk up the school stairs without pausing every few steps. The pediatrician adjusted his medication plan. "Needs a different prescription," Dr. Langford said. "Stronger, faster acting, but it's expensive." Leah asked, "How much?" $200 a month. Their insurance wouldn't cover it, not without prior approval and weeks of paperwork. They didn't have weeks. Eli was getting worse by the day. She sold her old laptop, pawned her class textbooks, took extra shifts at the diner, and stopped buying fresh produce for 2 weeks. By Sunday night, she had $47 in change, and a son who could barely breathe. She sat on the floor of their small bathroom that night, the tile cold against her back. She held the inhaler in one hand and Gloria's pill organizer in the other, wondering how she'd ended up here. A college dropout, a waitress, a daughter and mother trying to be both at once, and failing at both, it felt like. But Eli never complained. Even when his lungs fought for air, he still whispered dreams of bridges and moon bases. He still drew towers and sketched blueprints on napkins. He still believed in something bigger. The next morning, Leah stood in the doorway as Eli got dressed. "You think the new medicine will help?" he asked, his voice raspy. She nodded. "I think it'll make a big difference." He smiled. "Good. Maybe I can finally run the whole playground without stopping." She laughed, brushing his hair with her fingers. "That's the goal." But inside, she felt like glass. She walked to work in the cold morning air with $47 in her pocket and a prayer repeating in her head. Let something change. Let something give. Just once, let life bend in our favor. And then, that man walked into Tilly's diner. He ordered coffee and apple pie and sat quietly in the ripped booth no one else ever used. He asked her name. He asked about Eli. He didn't pity her. He didn't judge her. He listened. And when she asked for something bold and desperate, $50, he didn't laugh. He didn't scold. He sat back down, and he gave her more than help. He gave her hope. That night, after her shift, Leah walked home slowly through the quiet streets of Brighton Hollow. The town looked the same, the sidewalks cracked, the lamplight dim. But something had shifted. Something had opened. She reached their front door, hand still clenched around the folded napkin with "The Stranger's Promise" scribbled on it. He didn't know his name, but somehow he knew hers. And for the first time in 3 years, Leah let herself believe that maybe, just maybe, her story wasn't over yet. The bell above the diner door jingled gently behind him, and just like that, the man was gone. Leah stood for a long moment at the window, her hand still pressed against the glass, watching the dark car disappear around the corner. She hadn't even asked his name, hadn't thanked him properly. All she had was a folded napkin in her pocket and a growing ache in her chest that felt too big to name. The diner slowly returned to motion. Carla cleared her throat behind the counter and pretended to wipe it down, though the cloth barely moved. Martha, the cook, stepped away from the kitchen window, shaking her head like she'd just seen a ghost. Leah turned and forced herself to move. She grabbed a rag and started wiping the empty table where the man had sat, though there was nothing to clean. No crumbs, no spills, just an empty cup and the lingering scent of coffee. She wasn't sure if she felt grateful or embarrassed, or both. Maybe neither. Maybe it hadn't really happened. Then Carla burst through the front door, her coat half on, phone in hand, eyes wild. "Oh my God," she gasped, rushing toward Leah. "You are not going to believe this." Leah blinked. "What?" Carla shoved the phone toward her face. "I took a picture, just before he got in the car. Look." On the screen was a grainy image of the man stepping into the dark SUV. His face was turned slightly, but the angle was clear enough to see the jawline, the hair, the quiet intensity in his expression. Leah frowned. Okay, so? Carla pinched to zoom. That's Keanu Reeves. Leah stared. No way. Yes way. I've seen every one of his movies. That's him. Same hair, same face. I mean, look at him. Leah's heart gave a jolt. You're serious? I'm completely serious, Carla said, already opening YouTube on her phone. She scrolled, clicked a video, and turned the volume up. A clip played of Keanu Reeves on a talk show, speaking in that same gentle, gravel-soft voice. Leah felt the breath catch in her throat. It was him. That was his voice. That was the man who had sat in her booth and listened to her talk about Eli's bridges and moon dreams. That was the man who had quietly promised to cover a life-saving prescription like it was as normal as buying coffee. I didn't recognize him, Leah whispered. Carla laughed in disbelief. Are you kidding? That man could wear a paper bag and still be Keanu Reeves. Leah looked down at her hands. He didn't act like anyone famous. No, he didn't. Carla studied her. But you really didn't know? I just thought he was kind. Carla smiled. Maybe that's why he helped you. By mid-afternoon, the diner was buzzing. Word had gotten out fast. Carla told Martha, who told a delivery guy, who texted his cousin, who worked at the pharmacy. By the time Leah took her break, 3 different customers had asked if the story was true. Was it really him? Mrs. Danvers, a retired teacher, asked while stirring her tea. I don't know, Leah said carefully. Carla thinks so. Well, if it was, Mrs. Danvers said, he's even more amazing than I thought. Someone else walked in just to ask for the booth he'd sat in. Another came in and ordered the apple pie, because if it's good enough for Keanu, it's good enough for me. Leah stayed quiet. She didn't know how to feel. Everyone around her was giddy with excitement, whispering about celebrities, fantasizing about movies being shot in Brighton Hollow. But Leah's thoughts weren't on Hollywood or cameras or autographs. She kept thinking about the moment his eyes met hers when she said Eli's name. The way he sat back down. The way he didn't flinch at her desperation. He wasn't trying to impress anyone. He hadn't cared that the diner was watching. He had just listened. After her shift, Leah walked to the pharmacy. The bell above the door jingled as she stepped inside, clutching the prescription bag she had held onto for days, praying she wouldn't have to explain her situation again. The pharmacist, a woman named Denise who had known Leah since she was a teenager, smiled when she saw her. You're here for Eli's new prescription, right? Leah nodded slowly. Yeah, I only have... Denise waved her off. You don't need to pay, it's been handled. Leah's heart skipped. What? Someone called this morning, said their name was K. Reeves. Paid for the next 12 months in full. Leah stood frozen. Mel made sure it was authorized under your file, so insurance wouldn't flag it. Denise added. I've never seen someone move that fast. Tears pricked at the corners of Leah's eyes. He really did it. Denise softened. Do you know him? No, Leah said quietly. I don't think anyone really does. She thanked her, took the bag, and stepped outside into the crisp evening air. The sun was beginning to dip low, casting golden light on the small-town rooftops and crooked mailboxes. Leah stood on the sidewalk, holding the bag against her chest, like it might disappear if she loosened her grip. People were talking. People were excited. But Leah wasn't thinking about the headlines. She was thinking about the fact that tonight, for the first time in weeks, Eli would sleep without wheezing. And that mattered more than anything. That night, after dinner, Leah sat beside Eli's bed and watched him draw a new bridge. He was using a red crayon, labeling each part of the structure with careful handwriting that tilted slightly to the right. Is this a drawbridge? She asked gently. Nope, he said, chewing the edge of his lip. This one goes to space. It connects Earth to a moon base. She smiled. That's a long bridge. I know, he said seriously. But I'm going to make it strong enough. Leah tucked a blanket around him and handed him a fresh sheet of paper. "Hey," she said softly, "remember that man from the diner?" Eli nodded. "The one who liked the apple pie?" "Yeah, he's the one who got your new medicine." Eli's eyes went wide. "Really?" "Really." He blinked slowly, like he was trying to process the weight of that kindness. "Can we say thank you?" "We can try," Leah said, brushing a lock of hair from his forehead. Eli was quiet for a long moment, then asked, "Is he a superhero?" Leah paused. "Why do you ask that?" "Because that's what superheroes do. They help people, but they don't always wear capes." She laughed gently, then kissed his temple. "Maybe he is." Later, after Eli had fallen asleep, Leah sat alone at the kitchen table. Her mother, Gloria, was resting in the next room, murmuring softly in her sleep. The apartment was quiet, except for the low hum of the refrigerator and the occasional creak of the floor settling. Leah opened her phone and searched Keanu Reeves. Dozens of results flooded the screen. Interviews, fan tributes, behind-the-scenes photos. She tapped on a video clip. It was an interview from a few months ago. He was talking about kindness, about loss, about how you never really know what someone is going through. She closed her eyes and let the sound of his voice wash over her. It was the same voice, gentle, thoughtful, real. She didn't understand why someone like him would help someone like her. She wasn't special. She wasn't famous or powerful. She was just a mom with a sick kid and a mother slowly losing her memories. But maybe, Leah thought, that was exactly why he helped. Because real heroes don't always look the part. Sometimes they wear worn leather jackets and sit in quiet corners of small-town diners. Sometimes they don't wait to be asked. They just notice, and they act. Leah looked at the folded napkin on the counter and smiled softly. She didn't care about the rumors. She didn't care about the headlines. All she wanted to know now was one thing. Why did Keanu Reeves come to Brighton Hollow? The following morning, the sun rose soft and golden over Brighton Hollow, casting warm light across the town's narrow streets and sleepy storefronts. Leah walked to the diner with a slight lift in her step, the cold air no longer biting, but brisk, invigorating. She still had Eli's empty inhaler in her pocket, not because he needed it anymore, but because it reminded her how far they had come in just 24 hours. Tilly's diner was unusually full by 7:30 a.m. Locals packed the booths, sipping coffee, murmuring stories, and eyeing the corner seat where the man in the jacket had sat. Carla had already printed out the photo and taped it to the back of the counter with a hand-scribbled label. He sat here. But that wasn't what made Leah stop in her tracks. On the counter, just beneath the register, was an envelope addressed to her in clean, upright handwriting. Carla grinned when she saw Leah enter and nodded toward it. "It came by courier," she said. "No return address. But, come on." Leah's fingers trembled slightly as she picked it up. She opened it carefully, unsure what she expected. Another bill? A letter of apology? But inside was only one small note, handwritten in black ink on heavy paper. "Every child deserves to breathe easy. Tell Eli I said hi." She read it 3 times. The writing was simple, the words ordinary, but something about them sank deep into her chest, like a warm stone placed over her heart. Carla leaned in, whispering, "That's his handwriting, isn't it?" "It has to be." Leah didn't answer right away. She just folded the note, tucked it safely in her apron, and smiled faintly. That morning, when Denise from the pharmacy stopped by the diner to grab a coffee, she confirmed what Leah already suspected. "It wasn't just 1 month," Denise said, unwrapping a muffin. "He paid for a full year. 1 prescription, 12 fills, all done in advance." Leah's knees nearly buckled. "A whole year?" Denise nodded, and he added a note to call him if Eli ever needs more. By noon, the story had traveled from the pharmacy to the barber shop, then to the library, and then to the radio station. At 2 p.m., the local DJ broke his normal country music playlist and spoke live on air. We've just confirmed that Keanu Reeves, yes, the Keanu Reeves, was spotted right here in Brighton Hollow this week, the host said, barely hiding his amazement. Not only that, he quietly helped one of our own with a beautiful act of kindness. No publicity, no press, just heart. The phone lines lit up immediately. But something even more surprising happened next. People stopped just talking about the actor. They started talking about each other. It began with small gestures. An elderly man at the gas station paid for the groceries of the young mother in line behind him. He didn't know her name. He didn't need to. A pair of middle schoolers who had been fighting for weeks suddenly showed up at school carrying one another's science fair models. "We figured if Mr. Reeves can help a stranger," one of them said shyly, "we can stop being jerks for 5 minutes." A local farmer, Hank Miller, donated 10 bags of fresh produce to the food pantry and simply said, "Felt like the right time." A high school senior named Mia, who had stopped painting after her father died, posted a new piece of art in the library window. Bright, vivid, and full of emotion. She wrote in the caption, "Sometimes you need to believe someone out there cares before you can care again." The ripple effect traveled faster than gossip ever had in Brighton Hollow. In church basements, people sat a little closer to one another. In classrooms, kids asked deeper questions. At the diner, tips became more generous. People began to look each other in the eye again, as if they were remembering something long forgotten. It was like Keanu had cracked open a small window in everyone's heart, just wide enough to let some light in. And the light was catching. Leah noticed the change in herself, too. She walked through town with less fear. She stood taller. She no longer braced for the worst with every phone call or knock at the door. There was still stress, still bills, still long nights. But something had shifted inside her. A thread of belief had begun to grow stronger, and not just in what others might do for her, but in what she might do for others. One evening, as she sat on the couch folding laundry, Gloria came into the room holding a framed photo of Eli from 2 years ago. "I know this boy," she said, eyes wide with recognition. Leah's throat tightened. "That's Eli, Mom." Gloria blinked, then nodded slowly. "He's mine, right?" Leah reached out and took her hand. "Yes, he's yours." For a moment they just sat there, hands clasped, the photo resting gently on Gloria's lap. "I think something good is happening," Gloria whispered. Leah smiled. "I think so too." That night, when Eli climbed into her bed after a bad dream, she held him close and whispered about kindness, about people, about how sometimes a single act could wake up an entire town. Eli, still half asleep, murmured, "Do you think he knows what he did?" Leah answered softly, "I think he didn't have to know. I think he just did it anyway." The next few days brought more surprises. The mayor's office announced a new initiative to spotlight small acts of kindness in the community. They named it the K Project, inspired by what people had started calling Keanu's quiet visit. Flyers went up on bulletin boards, inviting residents to write short letters about someone in town who had done something selfless. Within a week, over 200 letters poured in. Leah read some during her breaks at the diner. A child who gave up their birthday presents to donate books to the library. A teenager who taught his neighbor how to use email so she could talk to her grandchildren. A nurse who stayed late every night, unpaid, to sit with a lonely patient. None of it made the news. None of it went viral. But it mattered. And it all traced back to one man no one expected to ever walk through their door. Carla teased Leah often now, calling her the girl who served pie to a legend. But Leah always deflected the attention. "I didn't do anything," she'd say. But deep down, she knew that wasn't true. She'd asked for help, out loud, in front of strangers, without shame. And that, she was beginning to realize, was one of the bravest things she had ever done. One morning, about a week after the note arrived, another envelope was dropped off at the diner. This one was smaller, heavier, and addressed simply Eli. Inside was a gift card to the local bookstore and a folded blueprint sketch of a bridge, a real one, designed in meticulous pencil lines. It was signed, "For a future engineer. Build big, dream bigger." Eli nearly cried when he saw it. He pinned the drawing above his bed and began sketching his own version beside it. At school, his teacher said he raised his hand more. He laughed louder. He made a new friend. "Something changed," she told Leah. "He believes in himself now." That evening, as Leah watched her son color in the support beams of his dream bridge, she thought about all the people who'd come into the diner that week just to sit in that booth. Most didn't say much. They just looked out the window for a while, as if trying to understand something invisible. Maybe they weren't just thinking about Keanu. Maybe they were thinking about who they wanted to be. Brighton Hollow hadn't changed overnight. The sidewalks were still cracked. The grocery store still ran out of eggs too often. But something deeper had shifted. People were showing up again. Not for recognition, not for reward. Just to be human. Together. And at the heart of it all was a quiet moment between a mother, a son, and a stranger who didn't need to be known to make a difference. The buzz in Brighton Hollow didn't go unnoticed. Within days of the town lighting up with stories of kindness, local news outlets began calling the mayor's office. Mayor Conrad Walsh had served Brighton Hollow for 8 years, and while he'd always branded himself as a man of the people, he had grown cautious, even resentful of sudden attention, especially attention that didn't start with him. He stood at the front of the town hall that Friday evening, arms folded, eyes scanning the growing crowd. More residents had shown up than he expected. Folding chairs filled the room and people lined the back walls. Leah sat near the middle, flanked by Carla and Denise from the pharmacy. Eli sat cross-legged on the floor near her feet, sketchbook open, quietly drawing. Mayor Walsh cleared his throat and stepped up to the microphone. "I appreciate everyone coming tonight," he began. "I know there's been a lot of excitement in town lately, and I know many of you are curious about the visitor we had last week. Yes, we've confirmed that Mr. Keanu Reeves did pass through Brighton Hollow." A wave of murmurs rolled through the room, some excited, some skeptical. Walsh held up a hand. "But I urge you all to stay grounded. Let's not get carried away by the idea that one man, no matter how famous or generous, is going to solve all our problems." The room grew quiet. He continued, "I've served this town a long time. I've seen cycles like this before. Someone new shows up, makes a splash, people get hopeful, and then reality sets in. Hollywood celebrities are known for their grand gestures. They fly in, smile for a few photos, and leave. That's not real change. That's theater." Leah felt her hands clench in her lap. Carla whispered, "Is he serious?" Walsh pressed on, his voice rising. "We can't build our future on charity. Brighton Hollow doesn't need to be a stage for someone's publicity stunt. We need policies, planning, and patience, not fanfare." A few people nodded slowly, unsure. Then Leah stood up. The room turned toward her as she walked calmly to the front. She didn't speak into the microphone at first. She simply looked at the mayor, then at the room full of neighbors. "I didn't ask for a miracle," she said. "I asked for $50.00 for my son's medicine." A hush fell, and a man who didn't owe me anything sat back down and listened. Then he helped. Without cameras, without reporters, without even telling me his name. Walsh shifted uncomfortably. Leah raised her voice slightly. "If that's a stunt, then I wish more people were willing to pull them." The silence in the room held for several long seconds. Then an older man near the back stood up. It was Mr. Mendez, a retired postal worker who had lived in Brighton Hollow for over 40 years. "I remember when we had a health clinic," he said, "just off Maple Street. It closed down 6 years ago. We were promised a new one, but we're still waiting." Another woman, Ruthie from the bookstore, rose next. "Our elementary school used to have a music program. My daughter loved it. It got cut when the budget shifted. No one said a word about bringing it back. One by one, more voices joined in. The benches at the park haven't been fixed in 3 summers. The library roof leaks every time it rains. My dad applied for that small business grant the town talked about in 2020. Never heard back. Mayor Walsh held up his hands. Now let's not turn this into... But he was already drowned out. People weren't shouting. They were remembering. Unspoken frustrations were rising to the surface, not in anger but in recognition. Keanu's act of kindness hadn't just stirred admiration, it had stirred memory. It had exposed how long people had been waiting for change, and how little had truly been done. Leah looked around the room. These weren't complainers. These were people who had stayed quiet for too long, choosing endurance over noise. But now, something had shifted. It wasn't about blame, it was about honesty. Denise from the pharmacy stood next. I've watched Leah come into my store every month with that same prescription. I've seen her count out coins. I've seen her try to negotiate cheaper options that don't work. She never asked for pity, just fairness. A teacher in the crowd nodded. And I've watched Eli grow up. That boy builds more out of scrap paper and glue than some people build with full kits. All he needed was to breathe easier. That's not charity. Mayor Walsh rubbed the bridge of his nose. Ladies and gentlemen, I understand your concerns, but there's a process. Leah stepped forward again. Maybe that's the problem. Too many processes, not enough people. The room murmured agreement. She turned to face the crowd. This isn't about Keanu Reeves. It's about us. What we allow, what we ignore, what we accept, and what we deserve. People began to clap, not loud, but steady, real. For the first time in a long time, Brighton Hollow wasn't just reacting. It was awakening. Mayor Walsh backed away from the microphone, his expression unreadable. And Leah, heart pounding, sat back down beside her son. Eli looked up at her and smiled. You were brave. Leah nodded slowly. I had to be. For you. For all of us. The town meeting ended, but its echo lingered. The next day, the diner was busier than usual, not with gossip, but with conversations that mattered. People weren't just talking about Keanu anymore. They were talking about the future of their streets, their schools, their kids. Carla poured Leah a cup of coffee as she took her break. Did you sleep after that? Not really, Leah admitted, but it felt right. Carla leaned in. You should have seen the mayor's face. He looked like someone had unplugged his mic and his ego at the same time. Leah chuckled softly, then grew serious. I don't want this to be about one man. Even Keanu. He sparked something. But if we wait around for someone to save us again, we'll just fall back asleep. Carla nodded. So what do we do? Leah looked out the window, watching a young couple sweep the sidewalk outside their bakery. We stay awake. That week, the local newspaper published a special issue titled Brighton Hollow Rethinks Itself. The cover story featured anonymous quotes from town meeting attendees, along with a powerful editorial that read, Maybe it took a stranger to remind us how to be neighbors. More letters poured into the mayor's office, polite but firm. Requests for follow-ups, lists of unresolved issues, ideas for community events, repairs, and volunteer days. At the same time, a small group of residents, including Leah, Denise, and Ruthie, began organizing informal gatherings at the community center. Not protests, not rallies, just conversations. What's broken? What could be fixed together? Who needs help but hasn't asked? Kids started showing up too. Teenagers with ideas, elderly residents with stories, single parents who had stopped hoping anyone would listen. And everywhere, people kept referring back to one moment. One man, one seat at the diner. Leah brought the napkin note to the first gathering. She didn't wave it around, she just kept it in her pocket. A quiet reminder. She wasn't leading a revolution, she was keeping a promise. To Eli, to herself, To the stranger who believed a $50 0-cent tip could do more than just help a child breathe, it could help a whole town remember how to care. And deep down, Leah knew something that Mayor Walsh didn't. This wasn't about Hollywood, it wasn't about fame. It was about choice. Every day, people in Brighton Hollow were choosing something different. They were choosing each other. 3 days had passed since the town meeting, and Brighton Hollow hadn't stopped buzzing. The momentum hadn't slowed. If anything, it had grown. Conversations that once happened in whispers were now public. Coffee shop debates, church hallway suggestions, high school essays. It seemed the whole town had caught its breath and decided not to let it out. And then, just after the lunch rush at Tilly's Diner, a black SUV rolled up to the curb. Leah didn't see it at first. She was wiping down the booths when Carla's voice, low and stunned, cut through the clatter of dishes. "He's back." Leah turned. The car door opened, and there he was, the same man with the weathered jacket and calm presence. This time, Keanu stepped out slowly. No sunglasses, no hat, just a quiet smile. He paused on the sidewalk, looking at the front of the diner like it meant something, and then he walked in. The bell above the door gave a single chime. Heads turned. Forks paused mid-air. Carla's mouth opened, then closed. But Keanu didn't wave. He didn't speak right away. He simply looked at Leah and asked, "Mind if I stay a while?" Leah nodded, her voice catching. "Of course." He took the same seat as before. The booth with the taped photo behind it. No fuss, no grand entrance. Just a man taking a seat at a familiar table. But he wasn't alone. From the SUV emerged 3 others, a woman in scrubs, a man with a canvas tube full of blueprints, and a younger woman carrying a laptop and a stack of folders. They sat quietly at the booths nearby, observing, listening. Leah brought him coffee, and this time, her hands. Keanu thanked her with a nod, then glanced out the window at the town beyond. "I wasn't planning to come back so soon," he said. "But I couldn't stop thinking about what's happening here." Leah pulled up a chair beside the table. "It's been a whirlwind. You sparked something. People are waking up." He looked around the diner, noticing the way people were sitting closer, talking softer, but with more conviction. "I didn't come to save a town," he said. "I came to join one, if there's room." Leah smiled gently. "What does that mean?" Keanu turned to his team and motioned slightly. The woman in scrubs stood. "I'm Maria. I run a mobile pediatric outreach program. We specialize in underserved towns." The man with the blueprints followed. "James, I'm an architect. I've designed clinics, community centers, even libraries. I build places where people belong." The younger woman with the folders introduced herself last. "I'm Heather. I work in education development. Our focus is rural programs, STEM, arts, after-school projects. We believe small towns deserve big dreams." Leah glanced at Keanu, eyes widening. "You brought a team?" "I brought listeners," he said, "but only if Brighton Hollow is ready to lead." That sentence carried weight, not a gift, not a donation, an invitation. Keanu leaned back in the booth. "We've done this before, quietly, in towns that reminded me of something I used to need. But every place is different, and it has to come from the people. I'm not here to make speeches or cut ribbons." Leah blinked, absorbing it all. Carla, who'd been eavesdropping with zero shame, leaned over the counter and asked, "So? What does that look like? A clinic? A school? A rec center?" Keanu didn't answer immediately. Instead, he asked a question. "What does Brighton Hollow need most?" No one answered at first. Then a voice from the corner spoke up. It was Ruthie, the bookstore owner. "We need a place where kids can stay after school, someplace safe, where they can learn, explore, be creative." Maria nodded. "That aligns with our model. We've paired medical access with learning centers before. Keeps kids healthier too." Then Denise from the pharmacy spoke up. "What about mobile care for seniors? We've got folks who can't drive anymore and skip their checkups." James scribbled something on a notepad. "A mobile unit, maybe a shuttle system to the clinic site." Heather added, "And we could partner with local schools. Give older students a chance to volunteer, mentor, maybe even earn college credit." The conversation grew, folding outward like a flower. Keanu listened. He took no notes. He just observed, absorbing every idea like it was sacred. Leah watched it unfold with awe. The man who'd once dropped off a note was now offering something far more valuable: trust. He wasn't directing. He was empowering. By the end of the afternoon, the diner had become something new: a planning room, a hope chamber, a place where people stopped asking what they could wish for and started asking what they could build. Before Keanu left, he turned back to Leah. "I meant what I said. Every child deserves to breathe easy. But towns do too. Places like this deserve to exhale." She nodded, words failing her. Then Eli ran in from school, backpack swinging, breath steady, cheeks red from the cold. Keanu crouched down, smiling. "You must be the engineer." Eli blinked, stunned. "You're the guy." Keanu chuckled softly. "Guilty." Eli opened his sketchbook and shyly held it out. "I tried to make my own bridge, like the one you sent." Keanu took a moment to study the drawing. It was rough, but the bones were there. Arch supports, suspension lines, thoughtful placement of stress points. "You've got a good eye," he said. "But more important, you didn't stop when it got tricky." Eli beamed. "Mom says bridges are just problems we figure out how to walk over." Keanu looked at Leah and smiled. "Your mom's smarter than most engineers I know." As the day drew to a close, Keanu and his team prepared to leave, but not before scheduling their next visit. "We'll be back in a week," Maria told the town volunteers. "We'll come with proposals and listen to yours." Outside, as the SUV idled, Keanu lingered. He stood near the booth again, running a hand along the edge of the table. "This is where it started," he said quietly. Leah nodded. "A coffee, a question, a choice." Keanu looked at her seriously. "It wasn't just that. It was your courage. Most people wouldn't have asked." She exhaled. "I almost didn't." "Or you did." He turned toward the door, then paused. "You know, sometimes people think they need to be in a movie to change the world, but they don't. They just need to be awake in their own life." And then he was gone. The SUV disappeared around the corner, but the feeling didn't leave. The Blueprint team stayed in town 2 more days. They interviewed teachers, met with town council members, and walked the old abandoned lot near the community garden, already being envisioned as the site of something new. By the time the weekend arrived, a whiteboard stood in the diner's back room. Not for orders, for ideas. It listed everything from mobile care routes to community gardens, after-school labs to bilingual programs for the town's growing immigrant population. Leah took Eli there after each shift. They would read the notes together. And every time, Eli would whisper the same question. "Do you think it will happen?" And Leah would answer, "It already is." Brighton Hollow wasn't perfect, it wasn't fast, but it was moving, and at the center of its momentum was a single booth in a modest diner. Not because it was visited by a celebrity, but because the people who lived there decided they didn't need saving. They just needed to believe that change was worth starting. And now, with open hearts and steady hands, they were beginning to build. Eli had never met someone like Keanu before, not just because he was famous, but because he was curious. The day after the planning session at the diner, Keanu returned alone to the little house on Sycamore Street where Leah lived with Eli and Gloria. He didn't bring cameras or security, just a sketch pad tucked under his arm and a quiet, open smile. Eli was sitting on the living room floor, surrounded by popsicle sticks, glue bottles, and string. A small suspension bridge stretched across 2 stacks of old books, held together by ingenuity and hope. When Keanu entered, Eli looked up and froze. eyes wide. Keanu knelt beside the project. "Did you make this?" he asked. Eli nodded. Keanu studied the bridge like it was a rare artifact. "You used tension cords here," he said softly, "and reinforced the base. That's not just smart, that's intentional." Eli's voice came out like a whisper. "I didn't know if it would hold." Keanu smiled. "You built it anyway, that's what matters." They spent the next hour on the floor, side by side, sketching ideas on paper towels and torn notebook pages. Keanu told Eli about bridges in Japan, structures in the Netherlands, and how engineering wasn't just about math. It was about imagination and empathy. Leah stood at the kitchen doorway, watching. She didn't interrupt. Her heart ached in the best way. She hadn't seen Eli this engaged in months. Later that afternoon, Keanu asked if he could see the old community center. "It's a mess," Leah warned as they approached the building. "Hasn't been used in years. Roof leaks, floors creak, lights barely work." But Keanu didn't flinch. He stepped inside like he was entering a cathedral. Dust floated in the air. A broken chair leaned against a wall. The windows were streaked with years of grime. But there was space. Wide, open space. Keanu turned slowly, taking it all in. "You know what I see?" Leah raised an eyebrow. "A storage unit?" He shook his head. "I see potential. I see kids with ideas and no place to put them. I see makers, dreamers, thinkers, all crammed into bedrooms and basements. This place could change that." Leah crossed her arms, unsure. "It would take a lot. Not just money," Keanu said. "Vision. But we already have that. His name is Eli." That night, Leah sat on the edge of her bed, running her fingers over the corners of Keanu's napkin note. She still wasn't used to any of this, how fast it had all shifted. But there was something in Keanu's voice that didn't feel temporary. He didn't talk like a man passing through. He talked like someone planting roots. And for the first time in a long time, she believed that maybe things weren't just going to change. Maybe they already had. The following morning, Keanu returned to the community center with Eli and James, the architect from his team. They carried tape measures, notepads, and tool belts. No one gave orders. No one acted superior. It felt like a barn raising, slow and communal. As they explored each room, Keanu asked questions. What do kids in Brighton Hollow like to build? What would make them feel safe here? What kind of space encourages quiet thinking, but also loud curiosity? Eli answered, shyly at first, but soon his confidence grew. He pointed to spots on the wall, suggesting where 3D printers could go, how shelves could be repurposed from the gym bleachers, and how one broken skylight might be turned into a solar charging station. James took notes, like he was learning from a master. Maria stopped by with a first aid kit and a checklist of safety needs. Heather dropped off a binder of curriculum ideas for after-school clubs. Leah arrived just in time to see her son explain how he'd organize an electronics table with labeled bins and protective gloves. It wasn't a plan anymore. It was a beginning. Word spread quickly that the center was being visited, then measured, then imagined anew. By the afternoon, half the town had stopped by to take a look. Some offered paint. Others brought tools. A few just came to peek inside and remember when they were young enough to dream in places like this. One elderly man, Mr. Bellamy, brought an old wooden cabinet from his garage and set it against the wall. "This used to hold my train set. Maybe now it can hold someone else's." The community wasn't just waking up. It was beginning to build. That evening, Keanu stayed for dinner at Leah's house. Gloria, her memory sometimes blurry, had moments of clarity that night. She recognized Keanu's face from a movie she'd once loved and spent 20 minutes explaining a soup recipe she hadn't cooked in years. He listened, truly listened, as if every word was gold. After dinner, as the sky dimmed and porch lights flickered on around the neighborhood, Keanu stepped outside and sat on the front steps with Leah. "I didn't come here to fix anything," he said softly. I came here because I saw someone trying, someone asking for help with open hands, not shame." Leah nodded, her voice quiet. "It still doesn't feel real." "It's not a dream," he said. "It's just a different kind of story. One where people aren't waiting for permission to care." She looked toward the old community center, now glowing with lantern light and laughter from volunteers. "You really think we can do this?" Keanu smiled. "I don't think. I know. Because you're not doing it alone." And in that moment, the town of Brighton Hollow wasn't just awakening. It was beginning to believe in itself. The progress in Brighton Hollow didn't sit well with everyone, and no one voiced their displeasure louder than Mayor Conrad Walsh. From the moment Keanu had returned to town with his quiet team of experts, the mayor had been watching closely. Too closely. He had attended none of the community sessions, ignored the volunteers working late hours at the community center, and refused to return calls from Heather or James. His silence grew heavier by the day. Then, one morning, his voice boomed across the town hall. "This town doesn't need a movie star deciding what's best for us," he barked during a council meeting. "We don't need Hollywood telling us how to care for our people. We've managed just fine for decades." There were murmurs in the crowd, but they weren't all in agreement. Walsh leaned into the podium, his face red. "Mark my words, all this generosity? It comes with strings. You think he's just here to help? No one helps without wanting something back." That afternoon, Leah stood outside Tilly's diner, listening as the mayor's speech circulated through social media and whispers. Her hands tightened into fists. She hadn't asked Keanu for a miracle. She had asked for enough to get her son's medication. And what followed was never forced, it was offered. That night, Keanu didn't respond publicly, but his team took quiet action. Heather made a call to their legal advisor in Los Angeles, not for confrontation, but for clarity. By the following week, a pair of quiet professionals arrived in town. They weren't loud, they didn't wear suits or flash badges. They introduced themselves as financial auditors assisting with grant preparation. It sounded innocent enough. But behind the scenes, they began pulling city records, budgets, disbursements, old grant approvals, school funding ledgers. What they uncovered wasn't just troubling, it was heartbreaking. Hundreds of thousands of dollars had been quietly reallocated over the last 7 years. Funds originally earmarked for school renovations, medical equipment, and after-school programs had been funneled elsewhere. Much of it led to development projects that never materialized, emergency road repair jobs on streets that had never been fixed, consulting fees paid to shell companies, equipment purchases for clinics that didn't match inventory, all approved under Walsh's administration. When the team quietly shared the findings with Leah, she felt like the air had been sucked out of her lungs. "This is why the clinic closed," she whispered. "This is why Eli's school lost its science lab." Keanu sat across from her at the diner that evening, the files spread between them. He didn't look angry, he looked tired, disappointed. "This isn't just about money," he said softly. "It's about trust." Leah nodded. "What happens now?" Keanu didn't answer right away. He folded the papers carefully and stood up. "We give the town the truth, and we let them decide what they want to do with it." The next town council meeting was unlike any Brighton Hollow had ever seen. It was standing room only. The air buzzed with questions. Keanu didn't speak first. He sat quietly in the back, letting others lead. Maria stood and read a brief statement. "Over the past week, our team discovered financial inconsistencies that suggest mismanagement of public funds. We've prepared a report and submitted it to the state's auditor for review. The findings affect your schools, your clinic, and your children's futures." Gasps rippled through the room. Then Ruthie spoke, her voice shaking. "I've lived here for 60 years. I trusted you, Mayor. I trusted the budget votes, the promises. But the community center closed under your watch. My niece lost her teaching job. Was it all a lie?" Walsh stood, red-faced. This is a smear campaign, manufactured evidence. These outsiders don't know our history, our struggles. But then Heather stepped forward with documents. These are not accusations. These are facts. Verified bank records, missing receipts, and false vendor trails. If any of this is incorrect, we welcome clarification. Walsh's mouth moved, but no words came out. It was Mr. Bellamy who stood next. This isn't about Keanu Reeves. It's about what was stolen from us, while we were told to be grateful for scraps. By then the room had turned, not into a mob, but into something quieter, firmer, a town awakening to the betrayal it had suffered, not just from one man, but from years of apathy and silence. Leah stepped forward. She didn't raise her voice. She didn't speak with fire. She spoke with heartbreak. For years, I blamed myself when I couldn't afford Eli's medicine. I blamed myself when I had to drop out of college, when I couldn't give him a birthday party, when I told him we had to wait for better days. But now, I know I wasn't failing him. The system was. The promises were. Her voice cracked. And the person who helped us didn't ask for control. He asked for collaboration. That's the difference. Keanu finally stood. He didn't go to the front. He simply spoke from where he was. This isn't about me, he said. It's about you, your town, your children, your voices. I didn't come here to uncover a scandal, but now that the truth is out, I believe you all have the right to demand something better. There was no applause, just a heavy silence, and then one by one, hands began to rise. Questions, ideas, memories. A motion to initiate a full investigation. Mayor Walsh quietly slipped out of the meeting, his shoulders hunched, his power crumbling. The next morning, a local news van pulled into Brighton Hollow, not because Keanu Reeves was in town, but because the town itself had become a story worth telling. For the first time in a long time, Brighton Hollow wasn't waiting to be saved. It was saving itself. The day after the town hall, Leah went back to work at Tilly's like always. The coffee still needed brewing, the booth still needed wiping. Life didn't pause just because the world around her had shifted. But something felt different. There was a hum in the diner that hadn't been there before, an energy, a ripple of quiet hope. Around lunchtime, Heather walked in, followed closely by James and Maria. They didn't order food. They sat at the counter, glancing at each other until Maria finally broke the silence. "We want you to lead something," she said. Leah blinked. "Lead what?" James laid out 3 folders. Each one was neatly labeled. One read Healthcare Outreach, another STEM Access Program, and the last Community Food Network. Maria explained. The outreach program would bring mobile health screenings to the town and surrounding areas. The STEM initiative aimed to build learning modules with Eli and other students at the new community center. And the garden, well, that was for everyone. A way to teach kids, feed families, and restore dignity. "We need someone who understands the people here," Heather said, "not just on paper, in reality." Leah stared at the folders. "You want me to coordinate all this?" Maria nodded. "With our support. With Keanu's support. But you'd be the center?" Leah laughed, but there was no humor in it. "I serve coffee. I fold napkins. I wipe ketchup off plastic seats. I'm not qualified for this." James tilted his head. "And yet, somehow, you're the first person everyone trusts." That afternoon, Keanu showed up at the diner, not with fanfare, just with a quiet wave and his usual leather jacket. Leah met him outside, the wind tugging gently at her apron. "Your team's offering me the job," she said, still unsure if she was angry or overwhelmed. "I know," Keanu replied. "I asked them to." "Why me?" she asked. "Why me? There are a dozen people in town more educated, more experienced. I barely got through 2 years of community college." Keanu didn't answer right away. He glanced toward the edge of town, where the broken playground fence still leaned sideways in the grass. "When I was filming once," he said quietly, "we hired a woman to run the catering tent. Everyone thought she was just there to serve sandwiches, but when a crew member got injured and the whole day was in chaos, she reorganized everything, kept people calm. She'd noticed how we worked, what we needed, who was falling behind." He looked back at Leah, because sometimes the people who serve the most understand the needs the best. She looked down at her shoes, old sneakers scuffed from long shifts. "What if I mess up?" "You will," he said with a soft smile. "That's part of leading, but you won't be doing it alone." She took a deep breath and looked at the folders in her arms. They felt heavier than they should have, not from weight, but from meaning. For the first time in years, someone wasn't just handing her a task. They were handing her trust. That evening, Leah sat at her kitchen table, flipping through each folder by candlelight. Eli sat nearby, scribbling on graph paper with an intensity that reminded her of his father when he used to sketch out furniture designs on napkins. The healthcare outreach plan was ambitious. Mobile vans, visiting nurses, basic lab testing, mental health support, all scheduled monthly with a rotating calendar. Leah had spent enough time in clinics with Gloria to know just how badly these services were needed. The STEM Access program was even more personal. It included kits for hands-on learning, mentorships from real engineers, and a scholarship fund Keanu had quietly seeded under Eli's name. Leah's fingers lingered on that page. And the garden. The idea started simple, a shared plot behind the community center, but had evolved into something much bigger. Raised beds, compost stations, a teaching circle, classes on nutrition, soil health, cooking. Everything they were building wasn't flashy, but it was essential. Leah closed the folders and looked across the room at Gloria, who was humming to herself, unaware of the change unfolding. Then she looked at Eli, who was still designing a bridge. "Eli," she said softly, "what would you think if I started helping around town? Like, really helping?" He looked up, curious. "Like how?" "Like making sure kids like you get tools to learn, and that people like Grandma have doctors nearby, and maybe teaching folks to grow food together." Eli tilted his head. "I think you already do that." She smiled, blinking fast. "I'm just a waitress." He grinned. "You're my mom. It's kind of like being a superhero." Later that week, Leah met with Keanu and the team in the old schoolhouse being refurbished for community planning. The walls still smelled like dust and chalk, but the energy inside was alive. Leah stood in front of a whiteboard with a marker in her hand, surrounded by maps, calendars, and colored index cards. Her voice trembled at first as she shared her thoughts, then grew steadier with every word. She laid out a 3-month plan, prioritized the medical stops by distance and need, proposed launching STEM nights in collaboration with the local library, suggested involving seniors in the garden to bridge generations. Keanu watched from the side, arms crossed, eyes lit with quiet pride. After the meeting, he walked beside her to the parking lot. "You stepped up," he said. Leah shook her head. "I just followed the need." He paused. "That's leadership." She turned to him. "You know, for years I thought dreams were for other people, that survival was all I'd ever get." "And now?" he asked. She looked back at the schoolhouse. "Now, I think maybe survival was just the beginning." Keanu nodded. That's where most great stories start. And in the small town of Brighton Hollow, Leah's story wasn't just continuing, it was finally beginning. The town square was quieter than usual that morning, but there was an electricity in the air that couldn't be ignored. For the first time in years, it wasn't gossip or cynicism that buzzed through Brighton Hollow, it was anticipation. Mayor Walsh hadn't shown his face since the town hall explosion 2 weeks earlier. Rumors circled. He was out of town, or holed up in his home, or working with lawyers, but most people didn't need an explanation anymore. The files had been made public. The documents showed the trail clearly, and now there were consequences. The sheriff's cruiser pulled up outside City Hall just after 9 a.m. It wasn't rushed or dramatic, just business. A few townspeople stood at a respectful distance, watching as Sheriff Lyle approached the building with 2 deputies. 10 minutes later, Conrad Walsh was led out in handcuffs. He didn't say a word. No shouting, no denials, just a downcast stare as camera phones clicked quietly and old neighbors looked on with disbelief. Leah wasn't there to see it. She was at the community center, reviewing the supply inventory for the summer garden program. But when James arrived to tell her, she didn't celebrate. She just nodded, then got back to her checklist. The damage was done. Now the work had to continue. Later that day, the town council called an emergency session. Seats that had sat empty for years were filled with urgency and determination. With Walsh removed from office, an interim council had to be formed until a new election could be organized. Names were suggested. Some nominated themselves. Others declined politely. Then someone stood and said, "What about Leah?" The room went still. Leah was sitting in the back, notebook on her lap, scribbling potential irrigation layouts for the garden. She looked up, startled. "I'm not a politician," she said. "That's exactly why," someone replied. "You actually care." At first, she resisted, but the vote came quickly, and it wasn't close. Nearly every hand in the room went up. Later, when she accepted, she did it with the same simplicity she used when delivering food orders. "If I can serve coffee, I can serve my town," she said, "but only if we do this together." And with that, Brighton Hollow had its new council. Half of them were women. 2 were under 30. 1 was a retired school teacher who'd never held office in his life. They didn't know all the rules, but they knew what they were fighting for. And Keanu? He stayed in the background, just like he promised. He didn't step into the spotlight. He didn't ask for credit. He simply continued showing up. Some mornings he helped clean out old storage closets at the community center. Other days he brought lunch for the volunteers. On one occasion he spent 2 hours with Eli, teaching him how to solder a circuit without burning his fingers. People began to stop calling him the actor. Around town they just called him Keanu, like he'd always been there. Within 2 weeks of the new council forming, Brighton Hollow saw its first town-wide vote in over a decade, not just for city officials, but for where funds would go next. The choices were simple, but vital. Expand the mobile health van fleet, begin renovations on the abandoned library building, or invest in a vocational workshop for teens. Each proposal came with hand-drawn flyers, public discussions, and evening town circles around bonfires. Leah found herself chairing meetings by default, still unsure how it all happened, but determined to give everyone a voice. When she got overwhelmed, Keanu would step in, not to lead, but to quietly reassure. He'd pour coffee, move chairs, sit with residents who still weren't sure if change was real. When asked in one meeting why he was still in town, he smiled and said, "Because the story's not finished yet." Meanwhile, the fallout from Walsh's arrest continued to unravel. State officials combed through more financial records, and 3 other regional contractors were implicated in smaller fraud schemes. Restitution payments were ordered, and slowly the money that had disappeared began trickling back in. The town used the first recovered funds to reopen the pediatric wing of the clinic. Eli's checkups were now done in a clean, quiet room with real equipment and smiling staff. Leah visited every Friday afternoon just to say thank you to the nurses. She never stopped being grateful. But her role kept growing. She helped draft a new transparency ordinance for all future council budgets. She helped organize school tours of the community garden and personally led the opening ceremony for the new after-school STEM lab, named quietly after her late father, whose woodworking tools were used in its construction. The media came and went. A few reporters ran stories titled "From Waitress to Leader, One Mom's Mission," but Leah never liked the headlines. She wasn't interested in being a symbol. She just wanted to make sure no kid in Brighton Hollow had to ask for a $50 0-cent miracle the way she once had. The bakery down the street added a sandwich in her name. Leah's Special. Turkey, avocado, and sunflower sprouts. She laughed when she saw it on the menu. It tasted like someone finally believed she mattered. And Keanu? He began planning his exit quietly. Not because he was giving up, but because he knew the town didn't need him in the same way anymore. They had found their voice. Still, before leaving, he pulled Leah aside on a quiet afternoon. "You know," he said, "it started with you asking me for $50. She smiled. "I thought you might report me." "I almost did," he laughed, "but I'm glad I didn't." She looked out the window toward the playground being rebuilt. "I never imagined all of this." "You didn't have to," he said. "You just had to believe in something more than survival." She nodded. "And now?" He smiled. "Now you lead." And as he stepped away, leaving her standing beside a town being reborn, Leah realized the story wasn't about his arrival. It was always about her rise. The late summer sun streamed through the windows of Leah's home as she wiped down the kitchen counter. The place was still modest, old linoleum floors, thrift store curtains, but it was filled with warmth. Gloria sat near the window humming softly, folding towels with slow precision. Eli, in his room, was piecing together another model bridge, carefully arranging toothpicks into triangular spans. A knock at the door made Leah glance up. She opened it to find Keanu standing there, a paper bag in one hand and a soft smile on his face. "I brought blueberry muffins," he said. Leah laughed and stepped aside to let him in. "You brought muffins into the house of the woman who manages the town's food network?" He shrugged. "I was hoping you'd go easy on me since they're from Tilly's." He followed her into the kitchen, placing the bag on the table. The scent of cinnamon and baked sugar filled the room. Gloria looked up slowly and smiled, her eyes flickering with recognition. "You're the quiet man from the TV," she said gently. Keanu walked over and knelt beside her chair. "Ah, that's me. She's having more good days lately," Leah whispered. He nodded and turned back to Gloria. "I heard you used to be a piano teacher." Her eyes lit up. "Yes, for almost 30 years. My fingers don't move like they used to, though. I've always wanted to learn," he said sincerely. "Maybe next time you can teach me a note or two." Gloria chuckled and patted his hand. "Only if you promise to practice." Leah led him down the hallway, past a gallery of mismatched family photos on the wall. She paused by one frame, slightly crooked, its edges worn, and adjusted it with her thumb. "That was my grandfather," she said, pointing to the black and white image of a young man in uniform crouched beside a stretcher in a battlefield photo. He was a medic in Vietnam, spent 2 years patching up soldiers under fire. Keanu stepped closer. His eyes narrowed slightly as he studied the face. "What was his name?" he asked. "Henry Carter," most folks called him Hank. He went quiet. A breath caught in his throat. He leaned in until he could see the small unit badge on Hank's shoulder. Then he turned to Leah. "My uncle served with the 11th Medical Battalion. That insignia matches his photos." She raised an eyebrow. "Really?" Keanu nodded slowly. "Your grandfather once saved my uncle's life." Her hand dropped to her side. "What?" Keanu's voice softened. "During the war, my uncle's convoy was ambushed near Quang Tri. He took shrapnel in the leg. They were under fire. Medics were pinned down, but one of them crawled through the field, ignoring gunfire. Got him stabilized and out." He looked back at the photo. "That was him. That's the face from my uncle's stories. He never forgot it. Said that medic was the reason he came home." Leah stepped closer, a strange stillness settling around them. "You're telling me you helped me and Eli because of a man you never met?" Keanu shook his head. "Not because I owed anyone, because I remembered what kindness looks like. And when I saw you that day in the diner, I saw it again." They stood in silence for a long moment, both gazing at the photo. Leah's heart pounded, not just from the revelation, but from the clarity that swept through her. Her grandfather had always been a quiet man. After the war, he rarely talked about what he'd seen, but every so often, when she was little, he'd pat her head and say, "Never underestimate how far kindness travels." She never really understood what he meant until now. Keanu followed her into Eli's room. The floor was scattered with popsicle sticks, glue, and folded blueprints. Eli looked up, surprised to see the guest. "Hey," he said shyly, "I'm working on a cantilever bridge." Keanu crouched beside him. "Looks pretty advanced. What's the span length?" Eli grinned. 22 inches, but it can hold 5 pounds without bowing." Leah watched from the doorway, her eyes stinging. Her son, once so isolated by his asthma, was now full of excitement, eager to share his dreams. Keanu picked up one of the tiny wooden beams. "Your mom tells me you want to be an engineer." "More than anything," Eli said, "I want to build things people use every day." "You already are," Keanu replied, placing the beam down gently, one bridge at a time. Later, as they walked back into the kitchen, Leah poured them both some coffee. She couldn't shake the strange feeling in her chest. A circle had been completed. A connection neither of them knew existed, rooted in a decades-old moment on a battlefield halfway across the world. "Do you believe in fate?" she asked. Keanu stared into his mug for a second. "I believe in choices, and I believe that kindness leaves echoes." Leah nodded. "He would have liked you. I think I would have liked him too." The afternoon drifted by slowly. Gloria dozed off in her chair, the sun warming her soft features. Eli continued building, humming a tune under his breath, and Leah and Keanu sat at the table in the kitchen, not speaking much, but not needing to. There was peace in the silence. As Keanu stood to leave, he paused at the door. "Thank you for today," he said, "for letting me see this part of you." Leah opened the door, the air outside cooler now, dusk starting to settle over the street. "Thank you," she said back, "for seeing us, for remembering." He smiled. "I think some debts take years to understand, but they're never really about repayment." She nodded slowly. "They're about carrying the good forward." As he walked down the steps, Eli appeared behind her. "Mom," he said, tugging her sleeve, "was Grandpa really a hero?" She put her arm around him. "Hell didn't need medals to be one. He saved a life that saved ours." Eli leaned into her side. "Then maybe I'll be a hero too, someday." She kissed the top of his head. "You already are." And as the porch light flickered on above them, the photo of a quiet war medic still hung on the wall, bearing witness to a legacy that stretched across time, generations, and one unforgettable act of courage that echoed all the way home. It was a quiet Thursday morning when Leah heard another knock on her door. She wasn't expecting anyone. No council meetings today, no deliveries scheduled, and Keanu had already left town 2 days earlier for a short trip to Los Angeles. Eli was at school, Gloria was napping, and the house was unusually still. When Leah opened the door, a woman in her late 60s stood on the porch, dressed in a light blue cardigan with silver-streaked hair pulled back in a tidy bun. Her eyes were kind but sharp, alert in a way that made Leah feel both comforted and slightly on guard. "Hi," the woman said. "I'm looking for Leah Carter." Leah nodded. "That's me." The woman smiled. "My name is Sandra Reeves. I'm Keanu's cousin." Leah blinked. "Oh, of course. Please, come in." She led Sandra to the kitchen and offered coffee. The woman declined politely, opting instead for water with a slice of lemon. Once they sat, there was a long pause before Sandra began to speak. "I'm sorry to show up like this," Sandra said softly, "but I thought it was time you heard the full story. Keanu didn't tell you everything about why he came to Brighton Hollow." Leah raised her eyebrows. "I always assumed he was just passing through." Serendipity, maybe. Sandra smiled gently. That's what he wanted you to think. But the truth is, Keanu had a purpose when he walked into Tilly's diner that day. He wasn't lost. He wasn't on vacation. He was following something, or someone. Leah leaned forward, hands clasped around her mug. Who? Sandra reached into her purse and pulled out an envelope. Inside was an aged letter, yellowed at the edges, the ink faded but legible. She placed it on the table and slid it toward Leah. It was written by your grandfather, Sandra said, to Keanu's uncle Raymond. Leah picked up the letter carefully. The handwriting was unmistakable. Blocky, careful script she'd seen in old family recipe cards. It was dated 1973. Hank wrote this after the war, Sandra explained. Your grandfather saved Raymond during an ambush. They were separated after the evacuation, but Hank found time to write. He promised that if Raymond ever needed help, or if his family ever did, he'd come running. He called it a medic's debt. Leah's eyes scanned the letter, her throat tightening with every word. But why now? She asked. Why would Keanu come looking for that letter now, all these years later? Sandra nodded slowly, her voice tinged with emotion. Because Raymond passed away last year. He'd carried that letter for nearly 50 years. It was in his wallet when he died. Keanu found it while helping go through his things. Leah swallowed hard. And on the back, Sandra continued, was an address. Not current, but close enough. Hank had scribbled down where he was living back then. Brighton Hollow. Sandra leaned back in her chair. Keanu took that as a sign. He was already planning a break from work, something quiet and off the radar. When he saw the letter, he told me, maybe there's someone I need to thank. Maybe there's someone who needs to hear that a promise was kept. Leah stared down at the letter in her hands, feeling the weight of it. Not just the paper, but the years, the choices, the echoes of history converging into this single moment. I can't believe this, she whispered. Sandra nodded. Keanu never told you because he didn't want the gesture to feel like repayment. He didn't want you to think it was about obligation. He wanted it to be about kindness, freely given, no strings attached. Leah looked over at the photo of her grandfather on the wall. It all made sense now. The way Keanu had paused in front of it, the softness in his voice when he spoke about Vietnam, the quiet way he listened instead of taking over. He had been searching for something, or maybe someone, and he found both. Able to came to find a promise, Leah murmured. But he found a town. Sandra smiled. And a legacy. They sat in silence for a while, letting it sink in. Eventually, Sandra reached into her purse again and pulled out a small wooden box, no bigger than a jewelry case. She opened it and placed it on the table. Inside was a military insignia and a bronze cross medal, worn from time but still intact. This was your grandfather's, Sandra said. Raymond kept it all these years. He wanted it returned to your family, if they could ever be found. Leah touched the medal gently, her fingers trembling. I didn't even know he had one of these, she whispered. How never talked about the war much, did he? Sandra asked. Leah shook her head. Not once. Just said he'd seen enough to last 10 lifetimes. Maybe he didn't need to talk about it, Sandra said. Maybe he just wanted to live differently because of it. Leah nodded slowly. When Sandra stood to leave, she paused at the door. You know, she said, my family always said Keanu was quiet because he carried the stories of others. But lately, I think he's learned that sometimes, to move forward, you have to return to the people who kept you standing in the first place. Leah opened the door for her, the breeze drifting in from the front porch. Thank you for telling me, Leah said. Sandra smiled. Thank you for being the reason he stayed. After Sandra left, Leah stood for a long time in the hallway, letter and medal still in hand. She didn't cry, not yet. There would be time for that. Instead, she walked into Gloria's room and placed the medal on the nightstand. Gloria opened her eyes slowly, blinking at the familiar object. "Where'd you find that?" she asked. "Grandpa sent it home," Leah said quietly. Then she walked to Eli's room and kissed him on the head. "Your great-grandfather made a promise," she whispered, "and today it came back to us." Eli looked up from his bridge model. "Was it important?" Leah nodded. "More than you'll ever know." And as the sun dipped low over Brighton Hollow, one man's promise from a battlefield half a century ago completed its journey, carried not by fame or obligation, but by the quiet power of memory, honor, and choice. 6 months had passed since the day Sandra Reeves knocked on Leah's door and told her the truth. Since then, Brighton Hollow had become something no one had expected, a town reborn, not through grand gestures or political campaigns, but through steady, quiet effort. The most remarkable changes were the ones you couldn't always see. At Tilly's diner, laughter returned. The air didn't feel heavy anymore. Locals lingered over pie and coffee instead of rushing through meals. The walls now held a rotating gallery of drawings from schoolchildren, many of them from Eli's class, each signed in crayon, some with a little "Thanks to Mr. K" or "For Miss Leah." The counter gleamed a little brighter. Tips came easier. Leah still worked mornings at the diner, but not out of necessity anymore. She chose to stay because she loved it, because some roots didn't need to be pulled up just because you grew. In the afternoons, she ran a youth program out of the newly renovated community center. Once an abandoned structure with broken windows and peeling paint, it was now painted cheerful yellow and filled with activity. Kids built bridges from popsicle sticks, ran coding simulations, planted vegetables in raised garden beds, and held Friday storytelling sessions led by traveling writers. Leah had become more than a waitress. She was now a mentor, a speaker, a program coordinator. But above all, she was a believer. Believer in change, in growth, and in the value of one act of courage followed by another. She hadn't gone back to college in the traditional sense. Instead, she enrolled in a flexible educator certification program for rural communities. The classes were online, the pace self-guided. But her professors often reached out to say they'd never seen someone bring so much real-world insight into assignments. "You write like someone who's lived the things she teaches," one had said in an email. Maybe that was true. Leah never saw herself as a teacher growing up. She thought those jobs belonged to polished women in big cities with sharp blazers and unshakable confidence. But now she knew that experience mattered too, that listening and surviving and staying kind in hard times counted just as much. Eli had changed too. With his asthma now managed and a whole year of medication secured, he joined the school's robotics club. His latest project, a miniature drawbridge, had earned him 3rd place in a statewide competition. The principal had called Leah personally to tell her how impressed they were by Eli's dedication, his teamwork, and his leadership. "He doesn't just build," the principal said. "He lifts up the other kids too. He's always the first to help fix someone else's design." Leah had smiled through the phone, tears pooling behind her eyes. That was her boy. Gloria's memory had its ups and downs, but her joy was constant. On her good days, she helped prepare snack kits for the after-school program. On her foggier days, she sat in the center garden, humming songs from her teaching days, letting the sun warm her face as the kids played nearby. The town itself had grown into something new. People fixed their own homes again. Murals appeared on old brick walls. Farmers offered surplus produce to the free market table set up outside the diner every Saturday morning. And, perhaps most telling, people who had once left started coming back. Young couples, retired teachers, a few who had been born here but never imagined returning. They came back because they heard something had shifted, because Brighton Hollow was no longer a place where dreams went to die. It was becoming a place where they could grow again. Keanu visited now and then, always quietly, always without fanfare. He didn't attend ribbon cuttings or pose for press. Sometimes he'd stop by the diner for a cup of coffee and slip a book onto the community shelf. Other times he'd sit in on a kid's robotics session and ask them questions about their creations. No cameras, no speeches, just presence. Leah and he stayed in touch through handwritten notes. They had a little tradition now, mailing each other one quote a month, something meaningful, something that made them think. His most recent one read, "Legacy isn't what you leave behind, it's what you build that outlives you." She pinned it to the bulletin board in the center office, right beside Eli's third-place ribbon. One crisp November morning, Leah stood outside the diner before opening. She looked across Main Street, where kids were lining up for the weekend coding club. The sun hadn't fully risen yet, but light was spilling across the sidewalk. She held a folder in her hand, her educator's certification, officially completed. It hadn't come fast, it hadn't come easy, but it had come. She walked into the diner and hung the certificate next to the chalkboard menu. Carla laughed when she saw it. "Tilly's is now officially run by a certified teacher. Hope you're still good at pouring coffee." Leah grinned. "Only if you're still good at burning toast." They both laughed, and the day began. That night, after tucking Eli in, Leah stepped onto the porch with a mug of tea. The stars above Brighton Hollow seemed brighter than usual. She thought about her grandfather, about the war, about a promise scribbled in faded ink, about a man who remembered it half a century later, not because he had to, but because he chose to. She thought about Keanu, about how people often asked what he was really like, and the truth was simple. He listened. He helped without asking for anything in return. He remembered what others forgot. He believed in people long before they believed in themselves. And perhaps most of all, he never lost faith that the smallest spark could light up the darkest places. That night, Leah wrote him another letter. It was short, just 5 words, but they carried the weight of everything she'd become. "You helped me find myself." And she sealed the envelope and placed it by the door. In Brighton Hollow, everything was quiet again. But this time, it wasn't because people had given up. It was because they were dreaming. And this time, they believed they could make those dreams real. The ballroom lights dimmed slightly as Leah stood backstage, heart pounding just beneath the lanyard that held her name tag. The backdrop behind her bore the title of the summit, Voices of Rural America, Innovation, Inclusion, and Impact. Below it, rows of policymakers, educators, nonprofit leaders, and community organizers filled the seats. Just a year ago, Leah had been pouring coffee in a quiet town most people couldn't find on a map. Now she was about to take the stage at a national summit hosted in Denver, speaking not just on behalf of Brighton Hollow, but on behalf of small towns across the country. She glanced once more at her note cards, though she hardly needed them. The words were etched into her heart. A woman in a headset gave her a gentle signal. "It's time," she whispered. Leah stepped out into the light. The stage was large, the screen behind her glowing with the opening title, The Moment That Changed Everything. A photo of Tilly's diner faded in, warm, nostalgic, real. Leah stepped to the podium, adjusted the microphone, and looked out at the sea of faces. Some looked tired, others curious, a few skeptical. She took a breath. "My name is Leah Carter," she began. "I'm from a town called Brighton Hollow, population just under 4,000. A place with one stoplight, one diner, and, until recently, very little hope." The room was quiet. "I'm here today to tell you how everything changed with a cup of coffee, a tired shift, and a question I was almost too afraid to ask." She paused. "I was working the morning shift at Tilly's. My son Eli had just run out of his asthma medication. The new refill would cost $50. I had 22. A few heads nodded. I poured a cup of coffee for a man I didn't recognize. He looked tired, wore a worn leather jacket, tipped well. I should have left it at that, but I couldn't. I needed to try. So when he got up to leave, I blurted out a sentence that changed the course of my life. She glanced at her note card, though she knew the line by heart. "I know this sounds crazy, but would you mind tipping $50 instead of $7?" There was a hush in the room, almost as if people stopped breathing. I expected him to laugh, or walk away, maybe say nothing at all. But instead, he sat back down, and he listened. The slide behind her changed. It showed a still frame from a phone photo someone had taken later. Keanu Reeves walking out of the diner, the collar of his jacket turned up, head lowered against the sun. A few people in the audience gasped softly. "Yeah," Leah said, smiling. "That's who it was." She waited for the surprise to settle before continuing. "But this story isn't about fame. It's about something far more important. It's about what happens when someone sees you not as a charity case or a burden, but as a person." She gripped the podium tighter, steady now. "Hell didn't just pay for the medicine. He asked me about my son. He wanted to know his name. He told me to tell Eli he'd be okay." Aaliyah clicked to the next slide. It was a photo of Eli, holding up a ribbon from his robotics competition, grinning ear to ear. "Today, my son breathes easy. He's winning awards, building bridges out of toothpicks, and dreaming of becoming an engineer." The crowd reacted with quiet admiration, a few smiles and gentle nods spreading through the audience. "But it didn't stop there," Leah continued. "That one act rippled through my entire town. The diner started thriving, the community center reopened, a garden was planted, and somehow I went from thinking I was just a waitress to running rural STEM programs and youth mentorship circles." She let the words hang there, a beat of silence to let it settle. "I've been asked many times what that moment taught me, and I always say the same thing." She looked up. "Sometimes the bravest thing you can do is ask, and sometimes the kindest thing someone can do is listen." A pause. Then a surge of clapping began at the back of the room. It swelled and rolled forward like a tide until the entire ballroom was on its feet, a standing ovation. Leah stood still, overwhelmed. Her hands pressed together at her chest, not in performance but in quiet gratitude. She hadn't come here for applause, but the sound of it washed over her like sunlight through a window she hadn't known was closed. After the session, dozens of attendees lined up to speak with her. A professor from Iowa said her story would be required reading for his students. A rural mayor from Kentucky asked if she'd consider helping set up a community pilot. A nonprofit director offered her a fellowship to expand the programs she'd created. But what meant the most came from a woman around Leah's age, dressed plainly, eyes wide. "My daughter's been sick," she whispered, "and I've been too proud to ask for help, but maybe it's okay to ask now." Leah touched her arm gently. "It's more than okay. It might be the bravest thing you'll ever do." By the time the conference wrapped, Leah had collected more than just contact cards and invitations. She had collected belief. In herself, in the work, in the idea that small towns held big power. Not despite their size, but because of it. That night, in her hotel room, Leah opened her notebook and wrote a single sentence at the top of a new page. Bright Hollow was never broken. It was waiting. Then she closed the cover, pulled the curtain aside, and looked out over the city lights. Somewhere out there, Keanu was filming another movie, changing lives quietly, the way he always had. But tonight, it was Leah's voice that had carried through the room, and for the first time, she didn't feel like she was following someone else's footsteps. She synced, she was walking in her own. The bell over the diner door rang gently, cutting through the quiet hum of a slow morning. It was just past 9 and Leah had been restocking the sugar caddies, moving in rhythm with the sleepy calm of Brighton Hollow's winter air. Snow fell outside in soft flurries, coating the sidewalks in a light white blanket. A few regulars sipped coffee at their usual spots, chatting about weekend plans and weather predictions. But when the man in the leather jacket stepped in, the air shifted. He moved with quiet purpose. Familiar, yet unexpected. Leah looked up from the counter, her breath caught for just a second. Keanu. He gave a soft nod, pulling his gloves off one finger at a time. There were faint smudges of snow on his sleeves. His hair was slightly longer than before, a bit more silver at the temples. "Room for one more?" he asked, a smile just forming at the corners of his mouth. Leah grinned. "Always." He sat at the same stool he'd chosen nearly a year ago, the one closest to the window, right beside the worn wood-paneled wall where they'd eventually mounted the quote that had come to define a turning point in all their lives. Leah poured him a cup of coffee, no cream, just a touch of sugar. Just like last time. She slid it in front of him without a word, both of them savoring the stillness that only people who understand each other can share. For a while, they didn't speak. They didn't need to. The town had changed since the last time Keanu visited. Outside, the old post office had been painted a bright blue by a group of volunteers. The elementary school had new benches built by the kids at the makerspace. The community center buzzed with music classes and robotics kits and home-cooked dinners shared by neighbors. Even the diner looked brighter, somehow more alive. Keanu looked around, taking it all in. "It feels different," he finally said. Leah nodded. "It is." She sat across from him, holding her own mug, her eyes tired but content. "I watched your speech," he said. "The conference in Denver. You did good." She laughed softly. "I was terrified. My knees were shaking so bad backstage I thought I might collapse." "You didn't." "No," she said, "because I kept hearing your voice in my head." "What'd it say?" She smiled at him. "One kind act can open a door." Keanu chuckled. "Sounds like something I'd say." They both laughed then, an easy kind of laughter born of having lived through the hard parts. Leah stirred her coffee absent-mindedly. "There's something I've been meaning to tell you," she said. "Something I couldn't say back then." He leaned in, curious. "I wasn't just scared that day. I was ashamed. Asking a stranger for help? It made me feel like I'd failed somehow." Keanu didn't interrupt. He let her keep going. "But now I see it differently," she continued. "I didn't fail. I acted. I chose to hope instead of hide. And it saved more than just Eli." "It saved the town," Keanu said quietly. "No," she said, her eyes steady. "It reminded the town that it could save itself." Outside, the snowfall thickened. Through the window, children walked in twos and threes toward the schoolhouse, scarves wrapped high on their necks. One of them waved through the glass. It was Eli, carrying a binder full of blueprints for his next science fair project. Keanu smiled. "He looks taller." 2 inches since October, Leah said with a laugh. "He's outgrowing everything. But he still leaves sticky notes on my bathroom mirror. Today's said, 'Mom, don't forget your magic.' He's not wrong." They finished their coffee. Neither one rushed the moment. Keanu placed a folded envelope on the counter. Leah glanced at it, but didn't touch it right away. "It's not money," he said. "It's a story." She raised an eyebrow. "About your grandfather? About what he did for my uncle in Vietnam. I found an old letter. It's yours now." Leah swallowed hard. "I didn't know the details, only that he'd served." "Hell didn't just serve," Keanu said. "He saved a man's life, and that man never forgot." For a moment, time slowed. Leah picked up the envelope and tucked it into her coat pocket without looking inside. "Thank you," she said. "No," Keanu replied. "Thank you. For asking, for trusting, for reminding me that this, all of this, is why I do what I do." As they stood to leave, Carla came out from the kitchen and handed Keanu a small paper bag. "Fresh cinnamon twists," she said, blushing. "On the house." Keanu smiled. "You're spoiling me." As they reached the door, he paused. His gaze fell on the wooden sign nailed to the wall just above the exit. The words were carved in hand-chiseled letters, their edges smoothed by time. One question can change everything. He reached out and gently ran his fingers over the words. "Did you write that?" he asked. Leah nodded. After that first day, I carved it myself. It's perfect, he said. They stepped out into the snow, boots crunching softly. The town was quiet, blanketed in peace. Keanu glanced back at the diner. Think anyone will remember how it all started? Leah looked at him. I hope so, but even if they don't, the change will live on in them. He nodded, then reached out and gave her hand a squeeze. Tell Eli I'm proud of him. I will, she whispered. Then, with a quiet smile and one last glance at the sign, Keanu stepped into the SUV and pulled away down Main Street. The snow kept falling. Inside, Leah returned to the counter and poured herself a fresh cup of coffee. A young couple sat in the corner booth, their hands intertwined. A teacher marked papers near the window. A boy helped an elderly man unwrap a breakfast sandwich. Life kept going, but above the doorway, bathed in warm morning light, those 6 words remained. One question can change everything. If this story moved you, tell us in the comments what moment changed everything for you, and what small act of kindness do you still remember to this day. Subscribe for more incredible stories that prove even the quietest voices can make the loudest echoes.